In terms of demographics, this is what our data showed us in terms of household headship. About 46% of PWDs were living in households headed by the fathers, and about 25.8% are living in households headed by their mothers. In terms of gender, that's the breakdown in terms of the PWDs that we interacted with. Then when we went ahead to also interact with the marital status of the PWDs that we interacted with, about 75% of these were still single. I just need to re-emphasize that the PWDs that we interacted with were still the catchment special group of the young persons that the program is targeting. I'll come back to particular content on the importance of inclusive work. Okay. So I will went ahead and just try to understand from the voices of the people, if we must talk about inclusive WASH, what do they consider as the importance of having an inclusive WASH program? And this is what the voices of the different groups of study respondents had to say, that if you had a disability inclusive WASH at school, it will help children with disabilities attend school more. Another also highlight from the different interactions also indicated that disability inclusive WASH at home supports children's acceptance in society. The access to sanitation has an important cultural and social implication for women, especially those with disabilities. Therefore, not having access to safe and adequate WASH facilities usually means women must navigate unsafe terrains, and often alone. This happens at night, to find a private place outdoors to take care of their sanitation needs, which puts them at risk. And as we continue, you realize that we went ahead and did assess the availability of birth shelters within these households and what this eventually would mean if someone positions in a space of a person who is actually disabled. So in terms of well-being as well, we went ahead to just understand when we must talk about access and control over resources and the assets and services by the young people. What does the data have to tell us? Interestingly, so I would just want us to look at this pattern here. So we have an index value, which is an aggregate of all the measures of access, and then we have an index value for control, which is the measure of all the attributes for control. Now, one of the things that interestingly the data told us that about 37% of the fathers within this the assessment location had access to land. But while only 37 had access to control to land, the control dimension showed up. And when we went to have a bit of a qualitative inquiry behind the data, what data told us that the men within this catchment locations have control over land that they do not necessarily have access to. And we wanted to understand, how do you have control over what you don't have access to? And we were able to appreciate that if someone came from, if someone's spouse had access to land from where they were coming from, the fact that they got married, then the man has the right to make decisions on what happens on that land, what we get to farm on that land, and several other decision making that happen on the land. So we take interest in land from the fact that if we must talk about well-being and appreciating Uganda as an agricultural country, what does that then mean in terms of programming and the decision-making mandates that comes with it? And then we also went ahead and assessed issues around access to physical assets and then the control, then issues around finances. So we'll just for programming purposes, then we did an index analysis of this, which is the average of averages of all the attributes. When we did the index of all, it showed us that about 42% from all the measures, the fathers within these households had access to these resources. Then in terms of control, it almost, the differentials are not very significant. So access and control were closely related. And it showed us that about 4 in every 10 of the respondents that we talked to, control was actually attributed to the fathers within these locations. And about 20% of control was the mandate of the mothers. And somewhat 5% access was to the sons within the household, and then about 16% was joint access between the father and the mother at the household level. So for us, what did that mean to us? If we must talk about well-being, and dependent on the different measures of well-being that the young people will be involved in, that because access is closely entwined to the mandate of the men within the household, we cannot speak well-being without involving caregivers in some of the spaces in the decision-making mandates. If at any one point the young people are going to choose to get involved in the spaces of value chain from production to the tail end within the agricultural sector, and that's if among the options of employment and employability, the agricultural sector is something that the young people may be interested in. And I bring this because about 2 weeks ago, we had a dissemination workshop in Germany, and one of the things that the data showed us from that side was the young people were not interested in being involved in agricultural activities. They're interested in being engaged in different other engagements rather than agriculture. So we just wanted to have an intersection and just understand, do the patterns suddenly change when we come this side of the Acholi sub-region? In terms of roles and responsibilities within the household as perceived by the caregivers, and understanding roles as a critical benchmark for decision-making mandates, this is what the data had to tell us. That in terms of production of main food crops, who makes the most critical decision? The fathers decide up to about 13%, mothers decide about 29%, the sons decide about 22%, and daughters somewhat 19% when we talk about our production of food crops. Then when we talk about issues around the purchase of household food crops, the decision making of the men the fathers start reducing to about 7%, and then the decision making for the mothers start increasing from that point of which food crops must we purchase at the household level, coming up to about 38%. And then when you think about child care, the men's responsibility at household level is about 5%. It significantly grows. It's about 60% for the mothers. And then if we must talk about hygiene, and critically because that's where WASH eventually falls, because we had a number of interactions to just understand what the WASH environment looked like at household level, at community level, then also at the school level. What was the data telling us? So we thought it was important to just understand when we must talk issues of hygiene, who is treated as an accountable stakeholder at household level. Data showed us that mothers are still considered the biggest player in that space. So for us then, what that means is, in terms of programming, that even as Save the Children will be supporting the mandate of the government in some of these pieces, is to make sure we're able to voice out the responsibility of all the critical stakeholders to be responsible for almost all these facets and not leave it to one particular group. Because if we must see the results that we celebrate at the end of the day and call it a contributing factor to well-being, then all stakeholders, even at the household level, need to be held accountable and not leave the responsibility to one group. We went ahead and just assessed decision making at household level as perceived by the caregivers. In terms of the decision making mandate on the types of foods to be cooked at the household level, significantly this was the role of the mothers, up to about 90%. The decision to sharing food at the household level still was a decision of the mother, up to about 95%. Then when we came to purchase of household assets, the fathers 41% and mothers contribute to that decision-making mandate up to about 31%. Then when we must talk about the sale of household assets, the fathers take the biggest chunk of the decision-making mandate, and then followed by the mothers, somewhat 30%. Then when you must think about the need to compete and serve in leadership positions, when we tried to just interact with the average of averages, it was able to show us that the patterns between whether it's a father or mother is almost equal. And if we must talk about well-being, then we must be able to empower these young people to get into spaces of leadership. And this is what the data could tell us. So implying that at the program level, within the household, the data clearly tells us that you can interact with either of the parents, and it wouldn't deter the young people's engagement in project activities, especially when we're thinking leadership. Then in terms of access to just abilities to seek health care, the fathers contribute about 30%, and mothers decide on this up to about 53%. So for us, what does this then mean to us, as in terms from the data points, is that conversations around health have been left as a mandate to the mothers within the household. So if we must have a change in conversations, then the sensitization has to happen, the advocacy for involvement of men at the forefront of some of these conversations need to happen at the different layers of engagement for advocacy for better health. Then when we think about abilities to seek education services, the fathers contribute up to 42% and mothers up to about 30%. We picked a voice in terms of decision making from the qualitative inquiry that we had, and this was basically an interaction with the DHO in Noya district. This is what the respondents, the critical stakeholder, had to say, that some of the mothers actually failed to make decisions on performing women hospital surgeries. And because of this, we are even losing lives because of the decision-making mandate that has to come with it. And one of the things we picked from that conversation was that the need to empower the people to be able to decide at critical times when the need arises is a voice that we need to put out there. So we are thinking from the programming lens that we need to start thinking community level advocacy to give the voice to the needy and vulnerable. We also went ahead to just assess the perceptions in terms of roles and responsibilities from the perspective of the PWDs. Who did they think is responsible for decision making? And this is what they had to say. When we talk about who is usually involved in the space of production of food crops, the PWDs were able to tell us that significantly it's the role of the mother, up to about 42%, and fathers contribute up to about 21%. Then when you must think decision making at household level as perceived by the special group that we interacted with, who is responsible for post-harvest handling, are about 12% was the role of the fathers, and 60% was the mandate of the mothers. So we see mothers significantly involved in the post-harvest handling. So as we talk about this entire space, is for us to always just be intentional to layer our thinking that if we must think value chain from the space of well-being within the agricultural sector, who should we involve in the conversations for the product to celebrate significant gains during the implementation phase? Then we went ahead and just tried to understand, what about when we come to marketing of these products? Who do they believe should be involved? And from the perceptions, and of the roles and responsibilities within the communities where they come from. And this is what they had to say about marketing. About 49% said it was a mandate of the mother, and then about 20% said it was the role of the father. Then when we went ahead and also assessed child care roles, significantly, you realize that the data patterns are almost not different between the different groups that we talked to. It's still considered more or less the role of the mother most of the time. Then when we talk about hygiene management, it still went back as a high pattern, showing that it's still considered the role of the mother. And then in terms of training, it was also still the role of the mother. So for us, what did that tell us? That whether you're going to deal with the young group that are without disability, or you're going to engage with those with disability, consultation with the mothers within the 3 districts is very critical as a support function. And towards the end of the slide, we talk about some of the mandates I think the caregivers should be able to play on the project in response to one of the objectives. Still a continuation on perceptions, on decision-making mandates. So you realize still the patterns between the different groups has showed to almost be the same. I just want to move us so that we're able to get to the deep dive of then what does the data mean for us as stakeholders, what are the pick-off points when we think about that program, and also in response to the assessment objectives. And we went ahead and tried to understand access to information, and because if we must talk about well-being and from the metrics of empowerment, then we can't run away from issues around livelihoods programming. Now, thinking livelihoods, it was important for us to think through access to information as a critical bedrock for the chain of access to be complete. So we went ahead and tried to just understand from the young people where they access information on production and other livelihood activities. So we layered this closely to agriculture, and from the lens of appreciating the metrics of what the parish development model is linking itself to, what would it then mean for the young people, given that the launch had the program is already started on. So this is what data showed us, that when we talk about source of information, our telephones contributed for, I just pardon the presentation from this point. This was supposed to just be layered a little lower. So our telephones contributed for about 89%. Radio contributed for about 1.9%. Our word of mouth contributed for 34%. So when we then thought about ICT for development, because you are thinking through the young persons, we went ahead and assessed their access to funds as well, because communication for development is very critical if you must think empowerment. The data showed us that almost all the young people that we talked to had access to funds. So then the only thing was now what kind of information do they access from these funds? A part of the things that the recommendation from the program eventually provided for. I think I have that on the next slide. So we went ahead and tried to understand how often they access this information, because information flow for us we thought was very critical for us to appreciate the linkage between the data points. And data showed us that from the fact that people are accessing this information, about 23% access this information daily, about 22% access information on a weekly basis, then about 5% access this information on a monthly basis, and about 35% once in a while. So we did an index to just appreciate data flow within a month, and showed that over 60% of the young people actually access some sort of information within the period of a month, implying you can rely on some of these data sources to get information to the young people if you must layer them to a space of well-being. So after interacting with the depth of data, we try to now marry the data back to what the themes of the assignment required. And these are some of the things that from the qualitative and the quantitative interactions, this is what we're able to pull out as barriers to the gender and disability inclusion in the program that will eventually, if not addressed, would affect us from achieving the well-being of the young persons. Critical for us to realize is the attribute of invisibility came out pronounced. And here we interacted with both reviewed literature and then the voices of the people, but also what the data points told us, and tried to do the national metrics and what does it mean for also the assessment districts. It showed us that persons with disability feel actually invisible when we must talk about the needs of the program. And this is where our intersection point of the data interaction, that one of the things that we appreciated was there are standards that have been created by government. So the standards are almost good on paper, because at the district level we are also not fully financed to take care of some of the standards that have been set up as attributes for implementation. Now, if we must talk about WASH inclusion, the districts haven't been fully funded to take care of some of these attributes. And we thought, what then can development partners come in and contribute to the thinking table beyond what has already been done, is can we start positioning for some of these limitations that have been left for the government to drive and get us in the space of right to the point of local level advocacy to allow the PW to have their voice, and that voice then gets layered to interactions that are leading us to the policy space where we are informing policy from the beneficiary point of view, so that they start feeling their needs are being heard and their concerns are being treated as visible, if we must talk about well-being for PWDs at the end of the day. Then data also showed us that the degree of social distance which people prefer to keep between themselves and persons with disabilities was the gap, instead of narrowing, it's actually growing. So a special point was when we went to the districts. I think about 3 of the assessment locations, because we did interact with 6 sub-counties, and luckily for us, the time of the assessment was a time when they were reviewing the list of beneficiaries of the parish development model. So the listing was happening at the sub-county offices, and you could clearly tell the differentials of where we having people with disability have been set out. They're sitting in an isolated space. No one is critically paying attention to treating them from a special point of needs view. We saw this also in schools when we went to the water points, that the able persons would access water before. Yeah. So whether I found someone who had a sort of dysfunction, allow me use that for lack of a better way to put it for now, but with all due respect for respect of persons in that category, is that able Carol would get water before the blind person, because they can't see me. But they could have gone to the water point before me. Yeah? So then what is the role of the WASH committee members who actually interact with that space? We spent about 2 hours at just the water point to just study the behavior at the water point. We accessed jerrycans from the community and went, like we're actually going to also fetch water. And we just wanted to understand, how are these people actually treated? So for us, it came from a point where it was from a focus group discussion we had had with PWDs. Then we allowed them to all get to the water point and for us to be able to observe. And one of the things we picked out was someone can actually pick a jerrycan away from the water point when this person was already due to access water. So for us then, what did that mean? That actually these people felt they are not important if a critical stakeholder was not there. So we went ahead and interacted with them to understand who did they consider stakeholders who they can rely on to take care of their needs and take care of their voices if they spoke out. And significantly, local government came out pronounced. And they said, it is local government that stands out for us if our voices have been put forward. They also mentioned implementing partners like Save the Children, World Vision. They made mention of AMREF. Some of the entities, they also step out too if they needed support. But then we realized the WASH committees were silent in the communities, and yet they do exist. And we thought these are some of the spaces that we could use to make sure these people don't feel excluded out from some of the services that they feel they're entitled to. Another attribute that we also found to speak into the issues of feeling excluded out of some of the services is when we went to, which is a critical highlight for us to consider, if we must talk about school safety, because when we talk about school-related gender-based violence, it doesn't only happen at school, but it also happens between the time periods of a school-going child, when they are not in school, when they're at home, or on their way back between school and the home. And one of the needs that the data showed us was that we have invested significantly in an inclusive WASH in schools. Then nothing has taken care of this school-going child while they're at home or during the holiday. So how do we then achieve the gains in terms of the WASH indicators while the child is at school that gets frustrated for the time when the child is not at home? Because if we must talk about inclusivity, then it should be a whole holistic umbrella. So for us, from the recommendation point of view of the study was, can we now start pushing also to set up inclusive WASH facilities at the community level that takes care of the entire matrix that has been embedded within WASH within the school setting. And it's for us as stakeholders to just think through that space and how then can also development partners where it is possible. Because when we're talking about this child, we can't talk about this child away from the communities where they come from. Also in terms of invisibility, when we talk about WASH and then taking disability and empowerment, the data also showed us that while these people are in these communities, we have talked about the youth centers being existent. The youth centers are not being monitored. The youth centers have not created, don't yet have a hybrid when we talk about well-being. So what kind of curriculum are you even having at the youth centers where these young people come? Apart from them coming and sitting there and some of them sometimes looking idle, who is monitoring that function? Are the development partners that are working with these youth centers, what is their critical role to contributing to already the staffing gap that the government could have? So then the voice came back to, can we have, as part of the recommendations that we felt would be critical for us to start saying, inclusivity that is leading us to well-being. If we can't have a technical working group, can we have a functional subcommittee that just looks at attributes of inclusivity for the young people, so it is treated not as a cross-cutting theme, but something that comes out pronounced, so that when its measurements are being done, it's being measured from a point of it should come with a pronouncement. Then the other barriers that we also picked into was basically the negative attitudes according to what we had. And because attitude eventually triggers into behavior at the end of the day, and whether I may be able to uptake some of the practices. The data showed us that how we perceived the young people, or even themselves, how they perceived themselves. They themselves have a negative towards themselves. So for us to start with issues of soft skills mindset change, within the training curriculums for young people is something that needs to be critical, because when you review all empowerment curriculums, nothing talks about mindset change. Nothing has been done to integrate soft skills for the young people. It goes straight into the package of this is what you need, this is how you do it, but we have not dealt with the mindset. So after you've given me the technical skill, my ability to dive in, because my mind has not been dealt with, we will give these people the tailoring machines, we will give them all the equipment, but if the mind hasn't been converted, they are not going to move. So we thought, can the curriculum have a hybrid that takes care of the mindset component, either being addressed at the introductory points of the curriculum delivery or towards the end, and can there be intentionality to also monitor the delivery package of the curriculum to the tail end. And we appreciated that it's a standard that is coming from top, from the national level, but can then, if at the districts where this project is going to be implemented, the hybrid is done, an assessment can then be done to get us a bit of a comparative analysis of whether we're able to see change after the 5 years, and then pushes us for adoption at the national level based on the results that we may celebrate from the program. Then also another barrier that we were able to pull through from this assignment was issues of stigma, really. And when we talk about stigma, we can't talk about stigma away from also mindset change, because it starts with me first of all feeling a sense of self-importance. Yeah, if I'm able to get to that level, then what the outside says about me is not going to impact me as much until I have had my mind converted. So we felt even when people were responding to these attributes this way, the silent support function for us there was the integration of the soft skills would address some of these attributes significantly over time. Another barrier we saw there was the access and utilization of youth-friendly sexual reproductive health. It's still a big challenge for the young people. And if we must talk about well-being for the young people, then we can't have them having children when they're not ready, because the time they lose in just child care is going to affect the journey to well-being, the journey to financial inclusion. Look at the entire matrix of the conversation around youth empowerment. So it's in that space. If they are having children when they are not ready, the issues of GBV are going to set in. So when you look at all the 5 indicators of empowerment, they get frustrated in the conversation if the SRH components are not well taken care of. Then also another barrier that we interacted with was the insufficient data on PWDs. On this assessment, we had targeted about 120 PWDs, and we couldn't find a one-spot center across all locations on the data on PWDs. And where we could find the data protection mandate on PWDs is just too much. The querying process for you to even just get that data of what you're going to use it for and all that, while data protection is important, we felt the accessibility to the data itself the data itself did not exist. So this is one of the recommendations that we thought we could bring forward to the stakeholders, but also for the development partners to consider that if a household mapping could be done to just beyond what the Washington set of questions support us with to assess disability, the number of measures the Washington set of questions do not answer to. Now, if we are going to talk disability and well-being in that entire chain, can the program, if budgets allow, do a complete household assessment across all the catchment locations, so that when we are doing a disability assessment, you're also assessing options for employability and some of the skills that they would require that can then be tailored to meet the needs, but also to appreciate that when we had the qualitative inquiry, a number of the young people, when we are talking empowerment and well-being, they want to be empowered for jobs outside of their current location. So it means if we empower the young people from Omoro, from Amora and Moya, then they leave those locations. The next time we come back to do assessment, it will look like no empowerment ever happened in that location. So for them to also appreciate that while I'm being empowered, while I'm getting this skill, can my services be procured from my catchment area? Is a critical conversation for us as stakeholders to start having. Another thing that also felt a bit of pronouncement in the different engagements we had with the PWDs is they felt that we then have something for material.
I wanted to add up to one of the things you mentioned. Whenever we are discussing about PWDs, and not only PWDs, the special interest groups, the PWD, the youth, again, the intentions of government have been very good on doing that, but the challenge has been the lack of triangulation. Take for instance, when we are discussing PDM, we focus on the communities, which is good, but sometimes we fail to bring out other points from these special interest groups like the youth, the PWDs, and so forth. And because of this lack of triangulation, when it comes to implementation, sometimes you realize that we reverse back to what we have been doing before. And in the end, it does not favor or it does not uplift, for this case, the PWDs. So, and one of the factors, or among the factors that affects this is the urgency and the timing of most of these development programs. Again, I want to use the example of PDM. I am a culprit myself. I'm a national trainer, and I have been more involved in Buganda and Akole region. But the challenge that government normally have is they hurry the program so fast. Within 2 months, we want you to sensitize everyone in the villages, in the parishes. You select enterprise groups. We need 10% PWDs, we need 30% women, and so forth. Within these 2 months, there are districts that have 80 parishes. The districts that could be having 100 even. You fail because of the urgency and the timing that you are requested to accomplish this task. They end up failing. And that's why sometimes when you move, my colleagues might support me, sometimes when you move, you'll find that the messages have not gone deeply with the communities in terms of sensitization, and that affects the uptake and sustainability of most of these programs we are talking about. So, and lastly, also the frequency of delivery of this information, especially to the other stakeholders apart from PWDs, the youth. How frequent do we go with the same message to them so that they understand, they begin implementing, and coming to me once with a particular message may not change me if I'm not somebody who is very good at grasping the idea. So how frequent do we go with the same message? We preach, we discuss, we dialogue with these categories of people whom we want to see them support the PWDs. Take for instance, how many times do we train the water user committees? Sometimes we train them once in 5 years. The CDOs are here. So, and you expect them to do exactly what you have trained them on. And yet the messages have not gone to them very frequently. So this one, we rather have a narrow targeting but we focus with repeated activities that will rather sustain the process. Then it's true that most data on PWDs are from UBOS. And UBOS has worked on estimates, and they keep on rolling the estimates. And in my opinion, in most districts, they will tell you PWDs between 4 to 5%. And yet, you're talking of 4 to 5%, then you say, okay, continue rolling it every year like that. But also something unique for us, we as Noya district, but I think also Moro district came in. We requested one of our partners, SOA, to first do for us a comprehensive data collection of PWDs. I would then request Save the Children that since we are partners in development, can we share this kind of data and information? Even SOA may not have the most accurate and detailed information, but at least it's better than what we have currently. So I would request that these are some of the avenues that we can use to exploit. Then I love your observation on the youth centers. The youth center, in essence, in the first creation was supposed to be a youth center for the youth. But I think government went through a lot of learnings, and the youth center is now being transformed as a center for integrated services. What does it mean to be a center for integrated services? It's supposed to bring in so many activities that affects the life of the youth or in the PWDs. I think this is the view, the current contemporary view of government in terms of development programming. It's very true that isolated targeting can lead to stigmatization, like I'm saying. They can stigmatize you, say this is for PWDs, but government is now trying to also say, okay, let's have a broader targeting, broader programming, bringing on board the PWDs and so forth. But the challenge right now is, the critical question is, how much is adequate? I'm not saying how much is enough, because enough is also a big question. But how much is adequate? If they give PWDs 10% in a parish, is it adequate? And okay, assuming we are giving 17 million, that translates into 1.7 million. Now, those are some of the questions that we should be asking ourselves.
I thank Carol and the team for collecting this data and sharing it with us, and Save the Children for commissioning it. I have a couple of comments. One, I want us here to validate whether it's a common understanding or a common practice here, that we in this area believe that if I sleep with a disabled person and I have HIV, chances are that I will become negative. That's the first point we have to validate. I saw that in the clip. Two, there's a general challenge of data on persons with disability. And of course, we cannot discount what UBOS is giving us because they are the mandated authority. But some of this data have actually been overtaken by time. We are now relying on projections. The law allows us to use projections. And sometimes even the data does not give us clear details on the different types of disability and the different challenges that each category faces. So I think based on these studies, we could actually, as part of the suggestions that you would share with Save the Children and the government, is that we need to do an in-depth study about persons, about PWDs, and have a comprehensive data that can help us to plan and implement, and can also help us to achieve the NDP 3 in the longer term. 3, there are suggestions that you make, like the technical working group for PWDs, like having a group where we would meet with young people to discuss issues related to GBV and other sexual reproductive needs. Like having structures that are specifically promoting accessible WASH for PWDs. Government has those structures in place. For example, government has, in our districts, we have reference group meetings for GBV partners. We have already the water user committees in place. We have the district council for persons with disability. For me, these structures which are in place by law would actually be supported or reactivated to become more inclusive in addressing issues that support persons with disability. So as a more sustainable recommendation, or a more generally acceptable recommendations, we could look at expanding or reviewing the terms of reference for these different structures, like the structures for district councils for disability, which goes up to the sub-county, district sub-county councils for disabilities. We can look at reviewing or expanding the mandates of the water user committees to include issues that will support adolescents, but also persons with disabilities. This is the kind of broader recommendations that we can come with as such a study. Because many times we don't have money to do research and money to do studies. So once we get these opportunities, it helps us to open our eyes and also to expand on some of these redundant structures. And we can actually work with them as partners to promote these structures and also to achieve our goals, but ultimately to achieve the broader goal of the development of the people. Finally, I am looking at young people and their level of interactions within themselves. I've been seeing these slides that give them percentages in terms of access, control, utilization, and I see that it's small. So it comes to my mind is what is their contribution within the household? And can we measure these contributions? And if we can measure them, can we then engage them more to be part of the households that are not just members of the households, but are participants in the welfare of these households? Because before you contribute to the community, you should first contribute to your household. And this figures actually clearly highlights the things that Carol was talking about. We see that these members, these young people, these kids, are contributing less in the households and are demanding more, which is of course fair, that we are supposed to respond to their needs. But we should actually demand of them to contribute first to themselves and also to their households before they can ask from either partners or from government or from their colleagues. This is my comment when I see these reports coming out. And, the tables, some of the figures are too small, but they bring out the information. Maybe the slides were highly congested. Otherwise, I want to thank you for the work and thank you for allowing me to give this comment.
Mine is just a quick one, a supplement to what the DCU Morogoro said, that is concerning the structures. We have government structures in the community who can be engaged to actually ensure that there is inclusion of people with disability, and also addressing issues of gender-based violence or issues related to gender equality. And the structure is the Youth Council.
My name is Mwaka Gaspar, the District Inspector of Schools tomorrow. First and foremost, I would like to thank the presenter and also those who participated in this data collection exercise. That made it possible for us to have this dissemination meeting. In the same way, allow me to also thank those who participated also in the interviews during the data collections and those who supported it in other ways. I want to begin by agreeing with your finding that indeed data on people with disability or children with disability is really scanty. For example, in the education sector, we used to have up-to-date data until the year 2017 because schools were required by then annually to be submitting data by filling a form called EMIS, Education Management Information System, which was very comprehensive. And they would also submit data on children with disability. But since that year, it was suspended. I think when NERA came on board, because of financial resource constraints, government couldn't continue. However, there is a hope because recently, government has communicated that they are going to revive that annual collection of information using EMIS. But nevertheless, we want to appreciate Save the Children for taking the lead and making sure that in the four districts or 3 districts where you're intervening and which are represented here, you take the lead in getting the necessary data for planning purposes and then for decision-making purposes. And also, I want to also agree with your finding, especially in the community. If you look at the WASH facilities which we have, if you compare the communities and then the schools are fairly okay. If you look at the nature of the facilities which we have, for example, the classrooms at the entrance, usually there is provision of ramps for the classrooms, and also when you go to the latrines, also there is normally provision for stands for children with disability and also ramps. Although of course the state of some of the latrines also now leaves a lot to be desired, because some needed rehabilitation, repair, but still nevertheless the schools are, in terms of inclusion, are better off. If you go to the community, you hardly see, for example, maybe latrine facilities constructed purposely for people with disability. The way it is found maybe in institutions like school, government offices, NGOs and what have you. It is really rare. And to me, we really need to focus more on the community. And I want to agree with the finding that the situation in the community is really one thing. Thank you very much.
Save the Children, organizing this, and every other participant here present. And barriers to gender and disability inclusion in programs aimed at improving adolescent and youth well-being. I had cleared every deliberation that was made there. However, I think this is one key aspect where Save the Children, the Power Project have to come in and put so much effort to make sure everything is reverted and the youth well-being and adolescence is handled and well catered for. However, there wasn't much that is like put here as in grading these barriers that were attained on ground. Which one is more pressing that needs to be so much attended to? That is the first concern. And then two, I wish to go to the second point where you did mention there is a growing gap between the persons with disability and those without disabilities. Literally, to me right now, I know the gap should be a bit reducing because of the many interventions of the NGOs, the government that have come in. However, not refuting your report, I would advise you try to quantify what is out currently. I know you may be the same team that is going to do a mid-evaluation and then an end-of-term evaluation by the time the project will be coming to an end. Kindly help us to also know at the end of the project, how is that gap standing? What stand is it? It is really absurd to hear fellow human beings who breathe, who walk like us, they feed like us, continue to hear time and again. I'm talking as in the shoes of the disabled persons right now. Here that gap is still existing and they are discriminated in public when actually they also deserve equal rights like us, equal opportunities like us. I had also a mention of the WASH committee not mentioned by these people interacted with on ground as to people who come to the aid of the persons with disabilities. I don't know if you took time to try and find out using your research what are the reasons as to why the WASH committee was not mentioned. Are they doing enough? What could be lacking? Could it be motivation that is really requiring they need to be motivated? Let's not just leave that hanging. I feel they live with the community and so their names should be out number one before even the government official names are mentioned. And then the aspect of negative attitudes, yes, that happens even in persons without disabilities. There are those you just find with low self-esteem. For one reason or the other, you cannot rule that out. However, I would implore maybe Save the Children as well as all of us, get into kind of looking at unique attributes, unique products, unique skills that can bring out that may easily favor out persons with disabilities, if at all we have to get such into place. You never know, they may rank up higher in such grades than given the chance with these other persons who don't have the disability complexities. However, we all ought to know that we stand to be candidates of disabilities at all times we live in this life. And so, starting with us, we should really preach the gospel of unity for the different persons that we are. Disabled or without disability, we are all one. So when we preach that, I think going forth, every other person in the community there will actually not look at themselves as discriminated. The report that came out from the Councillor 5 of Noya is actually not a nice one. The DCDO Amuro brought that out, and I really feel bad. If the House could help and we really disagree on that, or we agree on that, this aspect of sleeping with someone who is disabled to make sure that you heal from your HIV/AIDS. Honestly, that is not what is in Acholi land. I am an Acholi. Thank you. I request to stop here my submission.
Join my colleagues in thanking Caroline for the job well done. Initially, the paper was looking thin, but you elaborated so well. A lot has already been said. I want to bring this out. Government of Uganda has developed. Actually, government of Uganda looks at this vulnerable group as special interest group, that is the youth, PWD, and women. And it has come up with a lot of policies to promote them. And it seems, looking through the presentation, it seems majority are not aware of these policies and how their rights really is being promoted. So that could be a very big gap in trying to what? To control and access to resources. You want to open an account for a young person, you are in control. Why? Because there is that lack of what? Trust. So how do we build trust in these youth so that we make them responsible citizens? And then finally on the barriers, I think if you look at the barriers in employment, it's basically because of lack of exposure to education. Because education gives them, more opportunity.
Giving me the opportunity. I'm the chairperson of Moro Disabled Persons Union. It is a CBO that advocates for the rights of persons with disabilities. And I want to let the members know that we have our structures right from the district up to the village level. That's how we coordinate. I want to start with this. There's a slogan that says nothing for us without us. If you want to do anything concerning persons with disabilities, you definitely want to consult them. Make sure that you be empathetic. You try to come to them and listen to them. And you don't superimpose your ideas. Because a number of times, people also go and they talk to parents. And when even that person with disability is available, even me myself, sometimes when they talk to me, they want to talk to me, they first ask my guide, can I talk to him? And yet I'm available, you can come to me and talk to me freely. You understand? So I want to say that for any project or any thing that is designed for persons with disabilities, we need to do a deliberate effort to do the inclusion. So even when I had the DCD of Amuro, Mr. JB talked about the water source committee, those structures are in existence, but how many persons with disabilities are there in the committees? Do we have them? Do we even have one? It sometimes becomes a miracle to find one or two inside committees. It's just because people think when you're a person with disabilities, you may have a very myopic mind, narrow mind. So that brings me to the question that he brought, that can we validate the myth that when you sleep with a person with disabilities, then you get healed with HIV. I think I want to denounce the strongest possible term that myth is not something that we can rely on, because disability can come even when you are here in this room, isn't it? So when you get this challenge, can someone come and sleep with you and then they get healed? Those are some of the things that I think will again now promote the spread of HIV to persons with disabilities. Some people will now go ahead to start spreading because they think whatever has come on social media is true. So we want to denounce it, and I think we should even get a way to reach out to the public. The wash issue. A number of times, Save the Children and the people who conduct research, I feel very touched when I find this kind of reports being shared. When we are in a gathering like this, I would prefer to sometimes ask the participants, and we do the practical. Yes? Before we even bring this report, can we, all of us, can we go and access this washroom within here? Or even the hand washing facility? For instance, can we all get blindfolded and we ask people to go and access the hand washing tap? Can we do that? That in itself will make the members feel how hard it is, okay? Because in the community there, when you go like even to fetch water, you go today, people see you, people take their time. And people think it is actually your interest to become like that. And they want to hold you there, you wait until someone chooses to say, let us give him water. You understand? So it is a big thing that comes with attitude. Attitude, I told people that attitude is learned. You can choose to do something just to hurt an individual, and you can choose not. So sometimes we, as a person with disability, I will ask someone to go and fetch water for me, like my children or my siblings. Then they go with a jerrycan of water, they go there, they throw their jerrycans away. So, whose jerrycan is this? It is for the other blind man. You go and ask him, let him come himself to fetch water. Yeah? Because they want to see me so that they will be able to give me water. And yet my people can also support me. So it is a huge kind of challenge that we are facing unless we become part of the water committee, and then also the parish chiefs and the CDO interest themselves to put this as an action point. When they go to meet the community, they should also let that thing be part of the sensitization that we have these individuals in our community. When you check around the toilet facilities in schools and other institutions, let me say the sub-counties, you would want to think that maybe those structures or the latrines are made for the sake. They are not meant to be used for persons with disabilities. Others are even locked. I don't want to be talking without examples. If you go to Pabo Town Council there is a door labeled for persons with disability. I think the CDO can bear me witness. But when you go there, can you access? You cannot. You cannot. Even when we want to hold our workshops there, we hire the hall, but the toilet cannot be accessed. You see? So it is a matter of what? Talking and doing nothing. You understand? So those structures, the facilities are in existence but not being put to proper use. Why? Because people think that persons with disabilities are not seen on the ground. Until when they come to talk like I'm talking right now, then they will agree that they are there. But let us be sensitized, like in this workshop. Let us have a take-home when we go back home, what action are you taking to create a small change? What action are you taking? But if we only come here to receive, to validate the report, then we go back and we sit. It's as good as singing a song without dancing. So I want to receive this report and say that it is a true reflection of what happens on youth or persons with disabilities, and we have a lot to do to cause change. If we want to cause change, then we must also plan. We must also have timeline. If we don't have timeline for these kind of changes that we're talking about, then even in 2030, we shall be singing the same song. So I want to stop here.
And not to sideline and take it for granted that when you present data, it speaks to the stakeholders. I usually share with my team, about 5 years ago we had done, I then used to work for World Vision, so World Vision had been hired as a consultant to do a wetlands assessment alongside 5 other consultants. So after the first 3 had presented and the stakeholders threw away these reports, you get afraid to present next because you don't know what happened. So it's humbling to just hear consent from the critical team in here that this data is speaking to us and to the reality on the ground. I would like to appreciate the feedback that we have received. Most of it is basically to enrich the body of the report, and very few are questions. So I'll just attend to the few questions. We do appreciate the richness with which we have shared our feedback. And we'll definitely integrate that into the bigger report that eventually Save the Children promised through the program project manager to print out copies that eventually will go to the respective districts. In terms of the questions picked out, the first question was for us to validate whether when an HIV positive sleeps with a PWD, they turn out negative. Happy to note that our brother Francis has added a voice onto that. If the meeting agrees, we then take it as a point of note for us to know that that is not what it is. But I was also happy to hear from the stakeholders that have added a voice, is that for us to be able to reconcile some of these conversations as they're also coming from key informants that we interacted with from the assessments, irrespective of the mandates that they play, because then it's a voice that goes out, and sometimes information can be interpreted as and when how it comes through. A question was asked, what is the young person's contribution at the household level? And for me, what I picked from that was then, beyond what the data is telling us, we are seeing the young people as dependents. Can we then, while it is the mandate of the caretakers and stakeholders to make sure their needs are met, can they also be sensitized to appreciate what their roles at household level is? We are picking that up as a recommendation for the program to adopt in part of the social behavior change communication packaging to put forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Loom. You did provide feedback on the fonts for the slides being small. We take note of that next time better when we're sharing at such a forum. Then happy to also note the availability of the structures that then we just need to integrate in some of the pieces that take care of the concerns of the young person's well-being. so that we are not spreading all over the place, but using available structures for just integration purposes. We'll incorporate that into the recommendation section of the assignment. My sister here also indicated we did not grade or prioritize in terms of the barriers, so that we're able to focus on which ones should the program take up as a matter of urgency, so that it takes a cascading approach. We are going to regrade that in the report so that it's ordered in a certain manner for attention of programming team. Then she also did ask the need for quantification of the growing gap between the non-PWDs and PWDs. Because this came from a qualitative inquiry, we may not necessarily quantify this, but we'll try to find variables within the assignments that can be able to give us tangible statistics for us to do the triangulation alongside if it can respond to that. So we take note of that as well as part of a component to improve on the report. Then she did also ask whether the assignment did try to find out why the WASH committees were not mentioned. In terms of the statistics, the WASH committees did mentioned, but the statistics were lower than what came out for the local government and then the development partners. So for us, as part of the recommendations, we did also share with the WASH technical group at Save the Children was the lower level structure where the WASH committee comes out seems to be silent. Can we revamp those conversations to start happening, since they're the critical voice that government should be listening to and development partners? So thank you for picking that up, because the stats also did identify with it. Then another submission was the government has a number of policies, and it looks like PWDs may not be all aware of the policy dimensions on how it protects them. So for us, this also means it's a component for integration in the recommendation point, that as we are looking around social behavioral change packaging of information, can we also have continuous conversations about the policies, because they may be available, but not all may be able to access and understand the implications around them. So, and not sidelining the fact that then we have structures like where Francis operates. How can we then ably use some of the structures for dissemination and making known some of these policy attributes that can make us be able to enhance and celebrate project gains over time. Then another submission was we also need to tell the young people what their responsibilities are. That was coming back from our second submission, so taking it as a critical area for attention. Another submission was on barriers. How can the project look at those who are interested in furthering their education? And the submission came from a point that after you've trained them, so what? Some of them sell off the equipment. Can we go the deep dive to just understand who would want to go further than where they are at the moment? I guess this triangulates with the recommendation we did provide for data insufficiency. There's not quality data that you can ask the so what and have intentional programming around. And we did recommend the need for a household level assessment and try to link those parameters to programming needs as and when they arise, but also when you're thinking integration. Is this a kind of assessment that we want to do with a number of development partners coming together? That's something that, whether it's driven from the government side and all development partners who are doing work with PWDs, put something in the basket so that a larger research can actually be done. So we'll still pick that up and use this information to beef up and create a hybrid to that recommendation. Then another submission was basically recommendations still addressing issues around the barriers, and this picked on attitude and self-esteem, and it comes back to also the recommendation we did provide that spoke about the curriculum that we're currently using that doesn't take care of the soft skills. So this will also still use as a hybrid for that particular recommendation. Then good to know that already we have groups, so if we must be talking about empowerment and group engagement, it's a good platform that already Save the Children is doing this, so we'll pick this and still emphasize it as a point of celebration for sustainability of programming initiatives. Then I loved Francis's quote, "Nothing for us without us." So putting them at the forefront for decision making so that we are not deciding. When he said, if we tried some of these things out and blindfolded ourselves, I imaginarily blindfolded myself and I could clearly see that I would not get beyond that door and to better appreciate that for disability to happen, it's a nick of a second. So it's something that you can't rule out and say today I'm well and you're sure you will be in the same state tomorrow. So it helps us to appreciate the human nature behind this group. And thank you very much, Francis, for even just standing up. It takes boldness to speak out in the form that you did. We do appreciate that. You did also ask about representation and representation of PWDs within the WASH committee. I guess it's a reflection question for all of us in the room to be intentional when we are reviewing some of these structures. And even development partners, if we must adopt some of the structures to work with, then the terms of reference of engagement needs to be intentional, that a hybrid that takes care of all these needs eventually comes through. We'll still integrate that within the recommendation coming from the validation engagement for this assignment. And then you did ask, did the assignment, did we have data on livestock to capture from this assignment, given that livelihoods is all encompassing? And when you look at the bigger report, it takes care of all that. So by the time, I guess, Save the Children will be sharing the large report with the broader group of stakeholders for consumption and decision making, we'll be able to interact with all this data. There's a lot more that we didn't share in this presentation because the report is over 70 pages. We just picked out critical highlights that we couldn't just sideline. Thank you.
There is a concern on the issue of data for the PWDs. That is true. As an organization, we've been considering a lot of cross-cutting things, and this is the first time, this is actually the second project in the north that is having an element of the disability component. So there are things that we are struggling with, and I want to thank our colleague behind there who talked about liaising with ZOA and other implementing partners who may be having reliable information. But also we should not forget that nationally what is being recommended and accepted widely, and given that these reports are also internationally shared, is UBOS, just like our CDO here mentioned. But for our programming purposes and decisions at program level and at regional level, we appreciate that feedback. We will be able, I'll personally try to follow up and we see how much information we can get that can help guide us with our decision making. Then there was also a feedback on the issue of education, where we mentioned that the education component is more important, as some of these youth sell out, some of the kits that we give them, it's true they sell out, but I would like the manager to speak more to it, because as a project we have an education component for a category of youth.
I think the project has a target for all the different areas. We have the target for youth who are interested in continuing with school, but following our learning from the year. Most of the youth who are from 15 years above and they have been out of school for long prefer to do skills training, something that they can easily engage into, to raise money to look after their families. While the young ones who are 12 to 14 years are the ones who prefer to go back to school. So given that learning, it informed our design to support the very young adolescents to go back to school. And our selection process, we did emphasis on interest and will. Nothing like forcing them to go for this. You either register based on your what? Interest. We went ahead to do verification, meetings with their parents and all that. I know that the challenge we have is the youth 15 to 24 years, most of them want vocational skills. And yet we have entrepreneurship and also vocational. Their mindset is like vocational is the way to go. This livelihood, being in group, income generating activities is not what they want. Yet our experience for YEP, the youth who are in groups, up to now, their businesses are very sustainable. We empower them with the knowledge, with the skills. We link them to the service providers around, both private sector actors and government. So you realize that all they needed was, the skills and the knowledge on how to maneuver around and do their businesses. While some of them who are trained in vocational skills, others go get married with their skills, they don't even practice. While the ones who are even establishing their businesses, you find you give them startup kits, there are some who go sell them. So for me, I think as a project going forward, we are still conducting a lot of sensitization because we need their mindset change. The parents are also one of the influencers who feel like my child has to go for what? Vocational skills. I think you call it, is it biatara? That's what they don't want to hear. All they want is what? Teaching. Yes, so we believe that this first cohort, the youth who will participate in business and will be successful, are going to be the game changers among them. But for now, I think as a project, we are planning to conduct all-round sensitization again. But for us who are experienced with adolescent development, we believe in engaging them, empowering them to make decisions in their lives, but not forcing them. Because at the end of the day, project has a scope and lifespan. I will leave. They have to continue with what we have invested in them. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for that. Then there was also a request for involving of the CDOs in the BSNA trainings and monitoring. We've taken note of that. We will ensure that that is done.
Okay, maybe there's a gap, but I know that BSNA training, okay, we tend to work more with CDOs on group formation. Some of the CDOs here can confirm this. I think we don't leave out CDOs in our work, unless maybe in that area. We also had experiences, some CDOs were engaged, and yet the project has to move on. So when you're engaged and the project is moving on, we tend to get also an external person to support us. But I think if the project is to be appreciated, I think it should start from the CDO's office, because we really, really engage you. Yeah, but we have taken note for that. Yeah.
The other is we want to appreciate the Inspector of Schools. He talked about the EMIS. We have interventions outside power projects that are happening in schools, and we have specific interest on children with disability accessing primary education. So we request that there should be additional lobbying so that we have the EMIS coming up as soon as possible to also support us in our reporting and also to help us, because for now we are relying on the Washington group of questions, which may not be effective. Okay, so I don't know if we have any other.
Just to add on what she said, I know that most of us who are here, we also have the authority or the powers to do certain things and make decisions. How can we conduct comprehensive assessment for out-of-school and in-school youth with disabilities? Do you agree with me that we don't have those data across? I think Amuro tried, but for in-school. But when you want that data, you also don't have it. But can it be really part of your planning, and we really have that? You could work with development partners to contribute towards that assessment, but you take them. So that we have, when anyone moves in, you have something for one to start with. And we get to also know the situation analysis, where is it needed more. Our findings was showing more, was it Omoro? Omoro, but the labor market assessment, 3 years to another what? District. But when we went to beneficiary selection, trust me, Omoro I think was, especially, was it Lalomi? Was one of the sub-counties, because I was there. So we had so many cases of adolescent and youth with disabilities, especially mental, the Down syndrome, the epilepsies and all that. But there are no data to support us assessment. So we pray that maybe as you go to do your planning, kindly plan for that. The government partners who can just contribute towards that.
So, and that speaks into a comment for the need for an in-depth study on PWDs. I was asking myself, what exactly do we need to have an in-depth study on, from your perspective? Because right now, we at least have, opportunities for evaluations, and right now there is a project that is going to conduct a most significant change documentation. We are just working on it. And we want to look at persons with disability, children with disability, how has change happened, what is it that they consider the most important, because what may be important to us from our perception may not be an important thing to the other side. So if we get to understand the core gaps from your perspective, because we know already from our perspective, it is easy to integrate during the design of the evaluation or the assessment. So we request that as we have that, also feel free to always share those gaps. Then there was one request for validation that Carol has already talked about, testing negative after sleeping with a person with disability. We have all validated that it's not true. Is that the case?
Yes.
Silence means there are some people who are agreeing that it's true. Is that the case that when you sleep with a person, when you're HIV positive, then you sleep with a person with a person with disability, you eventually turn negative? Is that the case or no? No. It's not the case? No. Okay. But now it brings me to the program question. Is it a perception in our community? Because right now we are designing interventions and activities for our youth. So just honestly speaking, is it a perception that is existing that we need to integrate in our messaging to the youth?
It is not. That's why we are talking, because it is not.
It is not even a perception in the community?
No.
Is there one person who says it's a perception? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I know the person who brought that one out at least had some discussion with other persons with disability. So I think that one, we cannot intuit that maybe that's what's happening. But at least that will, because it's a leader or person with disability. So those things would have maybe in some settings, okay? Not necessarily in all the areas, but in some settings. So the best way or the best thing we can do is to concern that very persons, at least to be able to tell us where maybe those kind of things are being said. So we tackle it from that particular area, rather than generalizing.
Okay, thank you for that advice.
Thank you. I think adding on this, I'm not saying we should not go ahead and find out from her. I happen to work for people with disabilities for close to 5 years. That same information has been there since when I was working for people with disabilities in 2011 to date. It has been there. But it has been there, and if you try to find out the information where it is happening, we tried to do a kind of a baseline survey in Bulu and Omoro, when Omoro was still part of Bulu. That information did not come out clearly. So, I'm not refuting his suggestion that we go and look for more information from her, but I think it's just something that has been on and on. I'm not saying it is not true, but it has been there, you know, it has been there. Just like this saying that people used to throw children with disabilities in water. Is it still happening now? It is not, but it used to happen sometimes back. We did not even know that those things were happening, but we heard about it. But in Noya, it could be happening in some parts, but I don't think that information is true. The second information in that clip is about a CDO tearing somebody's, you know, somebody's document or constitution. I am a CDO and I feel very bad when I hear such a statement being, you know, publicized, I would say. It means we don't know actually what we are doing to the community. So I think we need to find out more. Is it really a CDO who did that? Or somebody just did it to tarnish the name of CDOs? So I think maybe before we go ahead to validate some of this information, there are some small other, you know, some issues that we need to clear without doubt then we come out with them. So I think those other ones, you really just see that they are just, you know, yeah, we need to edit that probably. Yeah. I'm not saying okay, there are certain things that are not happening, but I'm saying those ones that are very extreme, that a CDO would not do that sincerely. I can't believe that. I'm a CDO, but I can't believe that. Anyway, but I don't think it can happen. So that's my idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And the reason we are here, the way we Save the Children operates is that we are as open and frank with our stakeholders, the way things are. We appreciate that feedback, and indeed we are going to edit out that. But I think the instance of the consultant bringing it for us here is for us to listen to some of the core conversations that came out. And sometimes there are those silent things that may be said by one person that may speak volumes. So it's good that with the CDOs we are here, we have heard, and we are saying maybe it is possible it happened, maybe not. But it is also important that we shall edit it, but you've got the message, right?
Yeah, but I think all of us know this lady. I think we have our CDO here. Let her be tasked to give the information about the CDO, and the CDO will be cautioned. You know, that is a great mistake to tear the whole document. Yet we always guide them. We underline. Sometimes even if it is a page, we go to a whatever and print it on our own. You know, to support the community. Not only people with disability, by the way, especially this time of PDM, when things were all done in a hurry. We would support them. Please do for me this. Please go and photocopy. Please do, you know. So I think this lady should report to the DCDO. Our DCDO is sitting behind them. Let this lady tell the DCDO where did that happen? Which sub-county? The DCDO will know what to do. Yeah.
But I really hear you and I appreciate your feedback.
Yeah.
I think we are going to take it a step further from there. But we get your feedback. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
But I would advise, because there was already a finding. So now since we are agreeing that maybe the district CDO move and make approach. But I would advise let it be a proper approach. Otherwise, she may deny. So now let it be something good approach.
Yeah.
The approach should read.
She's our honorable. No one will disturb her.
Evening. By the name James Otik, NC Mentoria, Chairperson NC0 for sub-county. The new sub-county divided from next sub-county more district local government. I would like to thank Save the Children very much for the hard work, for the struggle, in our community, in our country, Uganda, consultant. Allow me also to thank the district leader who are here, the CDO, stakeholders, mainly political people. I thank all of you. I don't have much to say. I just like to appreciate again Save the Children for the well work you are doing in our community. You are struggling with the government, to support the government where necessary. I would like to thank you, and I beg you to continue, don't get tired. For us, we the politicians, our main work just to advocate and to sensitize the community where necessary. So I also like to beg our colleagues, my fellow leaders, let's continue with what we are doing from the various places where we came from. Because without our support, the project from the NGOs, all the development partners, they cannot work very well. So I also appeal to you, continue support, give our support where necessary to all the development partners within our area from there. So for this time now, I would like also to request the development partners, Save the Children, that when you are going to work within the community there, you please also, you have to accept our guidance where necessary, where we are giving our advice to you. You are your workers, all your staff, you advise them also to accept our guidance as a political leader or the stakeholders within the community there. Because sometimes when we are giving our advice, we give our advice for the good, not for our interest or for our own purpose needs. So for this, I would like to say this meeting comes for the end. We have closed officially. I say all this for God and my family. Thank you.